Well, good afternoon. What an amazing and energizing day of discussions. We're going to finish really strong, and we've built up some great momentum as we head into our concluding panel. Now, for those of you I haven't yet met, my name is David Trulio, and it is my great honor to serve as the president and CEO of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute. And I'm going to start off with a few thank yous. And first, huge thanks to Secretary McMahon and Secretary Jenner for having such a thoughtful opening conversation, and heartfelt thanks to all of our panelists and participants today. Speakers speaking with conviction and clarity around the challenges and opportunities facing education. This could not come at a more important time. Now, we've explored student well-being, outcomes assessment, school choice, high school pathways, and higher ed civic mission. And it reminds me of the call to action that President Reagan issued to the foundation when the institution that bears his name opened back in 1991, where he said he wanted it to be a dynamic intellectual forum where scholars debate the history and where policymakers debate the future. So a great call to action. Now, there's a through line throughout the discussion. America's education sector certainly faces challenges, but also real opportunities if we lead with purpose and optimism. And that brings us to our closing panel discussion. So a conversation between two governors about how state leadership can advance renewal in education, opportunity, and civic life. So make no mistake, governors, state legislators, and education chiefs in state capitals will be leading this renewal. Well, certainly, Ronald Reagan was a governor, and it's in our DNA to look to governors for their leadership, and we're super excited about this. And in fact, President Reagan once said, "We have a great diversity in our education across this great land, and more than education, in the land itself, and that is valuable to us." To lead this discussion, we have two governors who have been leaders in education, both in public policy and in the case of Governor Dunleavy, in the classroom as well. So, about Governor Dunleavy. After arriving in Alaska in the early 80s, Mike Dunleavy pursued his dream of becoming a teacher. He earned a teacher's certificate and then a master's of education degree from the University of Alaska, Fairbanks. He spent nearly 2 decades in Northwest Arctic communities working as a teacher, principal, and superintendent. Mike Dunleavy and his family moved to Wasilla in 2004, where he owned an educational consulting firm and worked on several education projects statewide. He served on the Matsu Borough School Board with 2 years as board president and then as a state senator for 5 years. As governor, Governor Dunleavy has championed the Alaska Reads Act to improve early literacy, and already the results are clear. More young Alaskans are gaining the reading foundation they need to be successful. Now, more than 3,000 miles away in Oklahoma, Kevin Stitt was an entrepreneur who, with only $1,000 and a computer, grew his firm Gateway into a nationwide mortgage company operating in 42 states and servicing more than $20 billion in residential mortgages. In 2018, he led Gateway through a merger and established Gateway First Bank, which today is one of Oklahoma's 10 largest banks by assets, with over $2 billion in assets, 166 mortgage centers across the U.S., and more than 1,600 employees. Governor Stitt has pressed for education reform through expanding school choice and modernizing how funds follow students. He's pushed for accountability in governance and invested in raising reading and math scores while expanding career and technical pathways. His aim is straightforward and ambitious: to give every Oklahoma family more options and every child the tools to thrive in the future economy. Moderating today's conversation is the Wall Street Journal editorial board's Mene Ukwe-Barua. So please join me in giving a warm and energetic welcome to our panel.
Well, thanks so much for the introduction, David, and thank all of you for joining. This is going to be a very forward-looking, future-oriented conversation. I've just gotten the chance to meet both governors beforehand, and I can promise you they have a lot of interesting initiatives that they're working on and a whole lot to share. But before we get into what's going to solve the problem of education today, I thought it was important to start by diagnosing how bad things have gotten nationwide. Just last week, we saw the latest release of the NAEP scores. That's the National Assessment of Educational Progress, also known as the nation's report card. And the results continue to be very bleak. We have seen record lows in math performance for 12th graders, reading performance as well. That's building on some earlier releases that came out last year and in January for 4th grade, 8th grade, all the way up through 12th grade. I wanted to start by asking both of the governors to talk about some of the problems why have we seen these steady declines in academic performance in our public schools? If you could talk about general problems nationwide and maybe even get into some specific ones that have affected you and that you've seen in schools in your states. You want to start?
I want to start. So Mike Dunleavy, Governor of Alaska, just quickly, my background is I was a teacher, principal, superintendent, school board president, worked for the university, so education is my career. Public education is my career. Whenever there's a question is what's wrong with education, you got to first define what is the expected outcome of education. And I think most people expect the outcome of public education to be proficiency in reading, writing, mathematics, science. The problem is that's not the focus of our current school system. It's not the focus of our current school system. And so there's a little bit of a disconnect between what the average American believes the school should be doing and what's happening in the schools currently. And so 1983, under President Reagan, I think it was, I forget his name, the Secretary of Education was Buell, Thomas maybe, Buell. They commissioned the paper, A Nation at Risk. That was the beginning of a modern conversation. Modern conversation, but that was 1983. Things have gotten worse since 1983. No matter what assessments you look at, for the most part, we're not doing as well, certainly compared to our peers across the world. The focus has always been somewhat on rote learning in our classrooms, and these are systems, and I'll wrap it up here quick, but these are systems that have been developed well over 100 years ago in the United States, our current school system. And it was modeled on a basis of our factory system at that time. And the purpose of it back then, ironically, was to take in immigrants from Eastern and Southern Europe and turn them into Americans and be able to help have them be part of the workforce. Back then it was the Industrial Revolution. We're so inadequately prepared to what's happening now and what's going to happen in the next couple of years in terms of AI and the intelligence age. And so there's got to be a radical overhaul, in my opinion, or we're going to fall further behind. And plus, added to that is the demographic decline that's going to impact our schools, consolidation of schools, workforce, et cetera. So at the same time, our populations are going down, and there's confusion as to what the mission should be. Artificial intelligence is going to be the tail that wags the dog here pretty quick.
Governor Stitt, could you follow up on that? Of course, there are problems with mismatch between the system and the goals in education, but I wonder if you have any idea why it's gotten worse. For 13 years, we've seen consistent declines, and those have accelerated. Do you know why things have gotten so bad with reading and math?
You know, well, just obviously, I think COVID contributed to that. You saw kids were locked out of schools for the most part for a couple years, specifically in certain states. And so you're seeing a lot of this, learning loss. You're seeing scores. The NAEP scores have certainly gone down. I've got a daughter that's a senior in high school, and right now, as she's applying to colleges, ACT, SAT scores are optional to even put in. And so just because they know that the scores aren't what they have been historically. So, but I think big picture, what has happened, I believe that we have to inject competition back into schools. We have to put parents in charge. And so hopefully we get to talk a little bit about charter schools and these refundable tax credits or vouchers or some of the things that we've done in Oklahoma and some of these other states. And Jeb Bush did 20 years ago in Florida, and he's helped a lot of us governors think about how do we inject competition, because in Oklahoma we have about 500 different school districts. It's hard to micromanage every single school district from a business perspective. So when you inject competition and you put parents in charge to allow them to go to any school of their choice, I think you're going to naturally have parents choosing the better outcome schools. And the schools, and if you look at the NAEP scores, you will see on the private schools, on the charter schools, they are 20 points higher than your public schools. So let's put parents in charge. Let's break up that monopoly, and hopefully, I know we're going to dig into that a little bit more. But I think it's a free market principle that we have to bring back, and because there's going to be disruption with technology, as the governor said, and we need to allow parents to be in charge of that.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned a vision of changing the curriculum to meet modern demands. You mentioned injecting more competition into education. Two of the big barriers to those sorts of changes have traditionally been teachers' unions, which often want to preserve business as usual, and also the Federal Education Department, unfortunately, in some cases. It issues rules and regulations that basically tie the hands of administrators and teachers and make it difficult to make any sort of change. Could you talk about how how you've interacted with unions, how you've interacted with federal regulations, and how they might have hampered things that you've tried to do in Alaska, or ways that you've been able to overcome some of those limits?
Well, that's a great question. From my perspective, and I was in NEA as a teacher, we were compelled to be in NEA as a teacher, and I've negotiated against NEA when I was an administrator. Their goal is not the goal we talked about at the beginning of this conversation. It's not necessarily outcomes. It's a system set up for workers, is what it is. It's a union-heavy approach to the workforce. And we were talking in the room earlier. There's a huge difference between education and schooling. Education is that aha moment. You can be educated here in 2 seconds by going on the AI and asking a question and learn something you haven't learned before. Schooling is the mass management of people, all the stuff that you see schools do, buses, lunchrooms, recess, teachers, all that stuff, calendaring. And NEA has a huge hand in that. AFT in other parts of the country too, but NEA has a huge hand in that. And if you go on their website, you're going to see things on their website that they believe should be goals and objectives that don't really talk about proficiency in reading or proficiency in math. They might give lip service to it, I'm just being honest, but they are not an advocate of student performance at any cost. They're not going to be advocates for outcomes at any cost. If that cost impacts the number of bodies, part of the system, they're going to oppose it. And if there's any NEA people here, they'll dispute that, they'll argue with that. But if you really look at what's happening, that is a fact. With regard to the Department of Education, quite honestly, I was excited to see President Trump appoint somebody who does not come from the traditional education ranks. And I think that's a benefit because they have an outsider view. They have a view of a parent, somebody outside, a business look on education. And my hope is that if anything, they develop a system where they block grant sooner than later so we can do things at the local level. But they also do as much research or forward looking into the near future as to what AI is going to play in education. It's going to be phenomenal what's going to happen here just in the next year or two. We can't even imagine what's going to happen in terms of different tools and different approaches to education because of AI.
Governor Stitt, any interaction with unions or federal regulations that have hampered some of your plans for reform?
Yeah, I mean, I would just piggyback on that. Obviously, if governors were having to deal with a lot of the teachers unions in our state, and there's some good folks there, but as far as a reform-minded, as far as let's try something new, that educators they're just reluctant to do that. They're literally protecting their employment or their numbers, and so big picture, we want dollars in the classroom, we want dollars following the student, we want dollars on a kind of pay per performance basis. And then when you think about what does this union spend their money on, I think these are fascinating stats, but about 38% of the dues that teachers pay will go towards political giving, and then 95 to 99% of the teachers unions are going to be spent on the Democratic side of the aisle. So, Janus allowed us as a state, was a Supreme Court decision, to force an opt-in instead of an opt-out method of collecting dues. And so there's some things that are starting to kind of break loose that stranglehold on education. Again, all we're trying to do is put parents in charge and let them choose where the best fits for their kids are and have the dollars follow the kid in the classroom. And there's all innovation. There's tons of ants on this ant pile with charter schools and different methods. And we're going to talk about apprenticeships, hopefully, and internships and this new getting kids ready for the workforce. And I always encouraged by trying to get our business communities engaged in what we need to train the workforce, right? And Oklahoma's workforce is different than Alaska's, or different than Maryland's, or different than Florida's. And so education should be done at the state level. So that's why we applaud President Trump and him trying to disrupt some of those dollars. And for any of those people that kind of disagree with, oh, we got to protect the federal Department of Education, I'm going to ask a question here. Anybody in this room graduated from high school before 1980? Few people? Okay. How is that possible? You graduated before 1980. You know, the federal Department of Education wasn't started until 1980. You couldn't possibly have had a high school back then, right? Well, of course not, right? So we know that, like to the Governor Dunleavy's point, if the money is block granted to the schools, it's the states that hire teachers. We're building schools. We're the ones closer to training our workforce. And so I think everything gets political up here in Washington, but really the point is have dollars flow to the students in the states, in Alaska and in Texas and in New York, and let us choose and let us get those dollars and hire the teachers, the best teachers. We want the best in our classroom, getting kids ready for the workforce.
And I want to stick with you for the next one because you brought up the idea of block grants and giving states more control over funding. I think that when you see bad results come in student performance, the argument from the unions is always they're gutting our funding. We have teachers who are living hand to mouth, having to pay for textbooks out of their own pocket. Just increase our funding and we'll be able to deliver the results that we need. Historically, we have seen the opposite, more and more funding in the aggregate level going into schools and worse results. And so the question, as you imply, is what is this money being spent on rather than increase the bottom line number? So if you had the opportunity essentially to zero base your education budget in your state, do you have an idea of what types of programs should actually be increased? Where should we be spending more, and what should be cut? Where would you move things around if you had a free hand to do that?
Well, first off, if you're exactly right, because they always say you just got to give us more money. I see our buddy from Oklahoma, Senator Shane Jett, in the audience, and he'll tell you that if you ask the education community, well, how much more money? They'll just say more, right? I think it happens all over the country, but I've put more money in public education since I've been governor in my first 6 years than they did for 30 years before I got here. So we're going to fund public education 100%. But we also passed the best, I think, school choice plan in the country where money follows the student. So if you come to Oklahoma, you're going to have up to $7,500 to go to a private school, to go to a Christian school, to go to a Catholic school, to go to an English school, a STEM school, wherever you think your kid's going to learn the best. And what I remind people all the time is rich people already have school choice. First time you move to an area, you and your wife would sit down and your spouse and you say, hey, where's the best school? What neighborhood are we going to live in? Let's look at this. Let's go here. Let's go there. Or my kid's getting bullied. I'm going to pull them out. I'm going to put them into a private school. And so we just opened up school choice for every single family in Oklahoma. And I think that's really the key. And if you look at outcomes, like I said before, charter schools in Oklahoma don't have any of the funding. They can't bond. And so they get about half of the amount per pupil as a public school does. But their outcomes are better. You're having Santa Fe South, is in South Oklahoma City. They have 4,500 students that are choosing to go to that charter school. Remember, you don't have to go to the charter school. You can choose to go to your zip code school, but 4,500 families, almost all Hispanic, are choosing to go to the charter school because the outcomes are better. But yet we have people standing in the way saying that's bad. Don't let that parent have that choice. Force them to go to the zip code school, right? I'm trying to get the zip code school better. But how can you micromanage? Anybody in this room, how in the world do we get in and micromanage every single classroom, right? Or every single superintendent? You have to inject a free market business principle into education. And we're not all forced to just go to one government grocery store. We're not forced to go to this store. New York City. New York City is? Oh yeah, okay, the mayor, that's the solution in New York. But I think on the funding side, that's the thing that I would say. And then pay per performance. I'll just touch on this real quick. We're trying to get our career techs and maybe even higher ed to focus on how much is this college graduate going to make? What is their earning, right? For example, if you're going to go get an engineering degree from the University of Oklahoma, you got no problem getting a job. The average engineer is going to start $80,000 to $100,000 a year. Did you know what the average gender studies degree is? Wage earner? It's $18,000 a year. $18,000 a year. So we are doing these people a disservice by telling them you got to go to college, you got to get this degree. And then career techs, their average salary, if you graduate from a trade, is going to be $62,000 in a year. Okay, an average just flat out college graduate across all curriculum is $52,000, right? And so in Oklahoma, we're really trying to get pay for performance back in our career tech systems, back into higher ed. Anyway, I could talk forever, but it's all right.
You want to follow on that's just what you're doing to promote school choice in Alaska?
That was great.
Yeah.
So Alaska is an interesting state from many perspectives. We have probably the most robust homeschool laws in the United States. We have two types of homeschools in Alaska. One is you can homeschool your child and not tell the government what you're doing at all. You just say, I'm homeschooling. That's it. There's no government intrusion, no government interference, etc. Then there's a public homeschool model that we have. Roughly 20% of our students attend our public homeschools. The largest school in Alaska is a public homeschool, 2,400 kids and growing rapidly. And basically what it is you can get a public school degree, you have public school teachers, but the teacher-student relationship is different than a neighborhood school. Some teachers will have 150 students. It's more like a client and a professional. They come in, they develop an ILP. There's 1,000 vendors, like a menu, private vendors, and you can actually develop an ILP where you can have a child learning how to weld, child taking a college course, child taking a Latin course at a Catholic school, learning how to fly, et cetera, and they build that ILP. I would use some of the federal money as a block grant to enhance that approach. Another interesting thing about Alaska is we have the best performing charter schools in the nation as per a Harvard research piece that came out in November of 23. You should look it up, ranks all the states. At the same time, we have the worst neighborhood schools in the nation, 51st in the NAEP scores, when you look at the NAEP scores. Why is that? Well, because when you have parents that coalesce around a mission, you're gonna have better outcomes. And our neighborhood schools, unfortunately, are controlled to a large extent by NEA and those that subscribe to the approach by NEA. So in Alaska, you have some of the worst neighborhood schools in the nation, according to the NAEP scores. You have some of the most unique home schools that are really educating kids. And you have the top charter school system in the country is in Alaska in terms of outcomes as measured by these same scores. I would use that money to grow our charter schools, grow our home schools, and I think more importantly, and Governor Stitt said this, rich people don't need the money. You need to put money in transportation and make sure that kids that are in a low income side of things are able to go and attend those schools. And so one of the approaches we've talked about is basically instead of school buses, as a vendor, you get folks that are, for example, driving Ubers. And they can then come to your house, pick up your kid. Maybe there's 6 or 7 kids in that vehicle. They all know each other, but they can stay later after school, or they can go across town to a school that maybe has a better program for them or works better for their family. These sound like common sense ideas, but you wouldn't believe the opposition to a lot of these ideas. So their solutions are there in the things we're talking about for outcomes. It's getting through the bureaucracy, getting through the unions, and getting through this paradigm that if you change, it's a problem. The problem is going to be this: if you don't change, and you don't start changing now rapidly, the change is going to change it for you. And that's going to be, I think, a big discussion the next couple of years with education, with the demographic decline, folks exiting the school system, consolidation of schools. I think what you're going to end up is what Kevin said, and that is money following the kid wherever they go, to the best neighborhood school, the best charter school, the best home school, best CTE school.
Very quick question for either or both of you. Do you think that there might be a ceiling to school choice? And this is a point that I've heard raised by Eva Moskowitz, who's the creator of Success Academy in New York, this huge, very successful charter school network. She says, we create an option for parents and students who are willing to seek out something better, but we can't give up on our traditional public schools because for the foreseeable future, that's where most of our kids are going to be. And so we still have to find a way to try to reform those schools even against the odds. Do you think that we are going to eventually see enrollment at some of these alternative schools start to level out and school choice will prove to not really be the solution that we need for all of our kids altogether.
Not if they're offering a product that the parents don't want. You're going to see more parents exit the schools, to be honest with you. And in our case, like I said, the public school, the charter schools, and other alternative schools, you're going to see more of that. Because, I mean, is there a ceiling to choice in hotels or restaurants or cars or any goods or service that you buy? I don't think so. The only ceiling would be, in my opinion, is political, that groups are going to want the neighborhood schools to stay there for the obvious reasons I stated earlier. But I think for the most part, ask a 20-year-old how many kids they're going to have. 8 out of 10 might say none or one. My generation, we had however many kids, and our grandparents, some of them would have 12 or 13. My wife's family had 14 kids. You're not going to see that. So inevitably, your demographic decline is going to drive a lot of this as we go into the future. And it's going to drive how education not just looks from a traditional sense, but I think you're going to see a lot more co-op schools as well, where parents that still want to get kids together for the socialization aspect of it will coalesce around smaller groups. So it's going to change whether they want it to or not. And the people that get ahead of the change are going to be the winners in this thing.
Yeah, in South Florida, Jeb Bush was telling me about it. He did school choice 20 years ago, and what he said was that about half the kids were going to schools outside of their assigned zip code schools in Miami-Dade County. But over the last 20 years, what happens is, if you're losing students, then what happens? You fire your superintendent, you fire your principal, you reinvent yourself, class sizes go down, and now you're seeing people come back and they're having to compete for those students. So again, it's back to competition, it's back to free market principles, so that's a good thing. What we did in Oklahoma, because we fought a lot of our rural legislators, we fought all kinds of folks trying to get it passed, was we set up a separate bucket of money for our refundable tax credit, which basically is just a $7,500 check to every family based on income. Max, or it goes down to $5,000 no matter how much money you make in Oklahoma. But that is, so if a kid decides to take advantage of this and leaves their zip code school, the per pupil funding actually goes up over here because it was a separate bucket of money. So that's how we got it passed, was we were like, we're not taking away from public school funding. Actually, you're going to get more per pupil if a student comes over here. But then over time, if we're right on this, parents are going to choose this option A, or these schools will get better over time. And I think that's really the fair way to do it or think about it. And I don't know what nationally is, but Oklahoma, we'll spend about $20,000 per pupil is kind of what the funding is across all things. The last thing I'll say is, the thing that's unique about the United States is this ability to bond locally. So if you think about it, in your local town, the community gets together, you pass a bond to build a new school or a new gymnasium. It's not like that in other countries. Like, it's such a federal model. You have to go to the federal government, say, we want to build a new school in Norman, Oklahoma. That's a great thing about America. We come together and we are a community-led, and we're willing to tax ourselves for the betterment of our community. So we're not going to get away from that. These are just other options that should be available for parents. And I think that's a very interesting point. But of course, the public schools, most kids are going to go there, and most schools are good. And my granddaddy went to, he was a Claremore zebra, and I'm a Claremore zebra, and by golly, little Johnny's going to be a Claremore zebra, right? So you have people that do not want to change that, which is fine. And then those communities are much closer. They're getting involved in the school boards and your rural communities across America. But some of these inner city schools, we saw it. We saw what they were teaching our kids, and parents got fed up. And that's why you're seeing a lot of this disruption right now in the education system.
Yeah, there's such a disconnect, though. I mean, I'm not going to ask people to raise their hand. I was a teacher, but if you have kids or had kids, many of you are going to make a choice as to where you want your kid to go to school. You're going to decide where you want to go to school for the child. And what's interesting is the biggest school choice individuals are teachers, public school teachers. They'll pick what teacher their kid gets in the school they may be teaching. Their friends in another school will tell them, don't put your child in that person's classroom or that person's classroom. So everybody in here in this room would say they believe in choice. They believe in choice in restaurants, what movies or cars you're going to drive, et cetera, et cetera. and more, the people in this room are representing the rest of the country. You want to have a decision as to where your kid is going, because as we've seen recently, things are changing rapidly in this country. Some things not for the best, and for those individuals that are going to have children, which unfortunately it's less and less as time goes on, you're going to be very careful as to where your kids are going to go to school and choose that. And that's why I think the neighborhood schools are going to be impacted, I think, dramatically over the next few years.
To piggyback his point there, so I was meeting with the chamber crowd, right? Y'all know what I'm talking about when I say chamber crowd, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm in the chamber meeting with all the Oklahoma City hootie tooties, right? And we're going over my policy agenda for, this is a couple sessions ago. And I said, they go, well, Governor, we're going to have to be neutral on your school choice plan. I said, no problem, no problem. I can totally get it. As long as all your kids in this room go to Oklahoma City public schools, I'm fine with y'all being neutral. And they all just kind of hung their head. Because every one of them send their kids to Cassidy. They send their kids to this private school, that private school. And that's what drives me crazy. Like, I don't want to name any of my colleague, my governor colleagues, but it was so frustrating during COVID as we were keeping our schools open. They were saying it's not safe to go to public schools, but their kids were in private schools the whole time, right? But they were closing their public schools down. And so those are the things that just drive you crazy, because they know they wouldn't send, like you said it very good. If you're a teacher, you're going to tell you, hey, don't put them in that class, don't do that. It's just common sense, right? You want what's best for your kid, and we want to empower parents.
The head of NEA Alaska sent his kids to private schools. That's like going to McDonald's or a restaurant and never going to eat there, and it's not good enough for your family. Send the kids to private schools, and fought to ensure that the public schools denied the ability to expand our charter schools. Actually fought also to deny teachers a retention and recruitment bonus of $5,000 for a classroom teacher, $10,000 for a classroom teacher in rural parts of Alaska, and $15,000 a year for 3 years in the most remote parts of Alaska. A classroom teacher could have got $45,000 a year, unheard of. And they fought that because they were not in control of that. It was going to come directly from the State Department of Education. That's what you're dealing with.
Chicago, too, for the record, one of the most brass knuckles anti-choice unions in the country. The head of the Chicago Teachers Union was sending her son to a private school the whole time she was trying to deny the expansion of choice. So
yeah, and I would say all parents have a moral imperative to send your child to the school that is going to meet their needs. And every one of your situations is unique, and you've got to find that place for them. And I really reject the idea that your kids have to be sacrificed on the altar of a neighborhood school just for the sake of a neighborhood school. You're never going to get these years back if you have kids, you know that. And these are the most formative years for your kids. And how many parents do you know and friends that you know in which their kids came out of school, some schools, in rough shape, having to see counselors, having difficulties. For some, it's a meat grinder. And so you've got to make the choices as to where your kids are going to go to school. We have an obligation as policymakers to make that available to you and make the schools better. But don't fool yourself. They're not going to get better on their own.
So another element of choice is the choice of what career path a student takes after they graduate from their secondary school. We have had a school system for generations that has essentially encouraged college as the default option, despite the fact that the vast majority of people in this country don't attend four-year colleges after graduating. It seems like a lot more people in government are aware of this problem and have started to promote alternative career paths. I'd love both of you to talk about what you're doing to promote alternative education through the schools, partnering with local businesses, things like that, for students who want to go down a vocational path.
Well, Kevin said, I think he highlighted something that's really important. Gender studies graduate makes about $18,000 a year. But what he didn't talk about is the debt they incurred to make that $18,000 a year. Okay. So I think what you're going to see in the future, and I think we're all in agreement on this, is if you can get an apprenticeship, if you can get training, and in 1 year you can become a welder, you can become a carpenter, you can become a mechanic. Those are professions that right now we don't have enough people to fill them. And there are programs across all of our states that encourage individuals to go into the trades, actually help underwrite the cost of that, and then they come out with no student debt, ready to work right out of the gate and perform services that we all need. If you remember during COVID, if you try to get your car fixed, how difficult was that? Or get a plumber, how difficult was that? I mean, plumbers, electricians, anyone that works in cooling systems, heating systems, truck drivers. These are all blue collar jobs, but they're going to make more and provide more of an income and a livelihood for students going forward, young people going forward, than what we currently have in many of our college degrees.
Yeah, I would say we, as Americans, I don't know, it started 30, 40 years ago, but this push that every single kid's got to be a college graduate. And so we have really forced people this one track, and we've left off, to his point, a lot of these trades, right? We know that the numbers, I said them earlier, I said $62,000 is the starting salary coming out of the trades, $52,000 for a college graduate. And so in Oklahoma, we're trying to disrupt that a little bit. I'm trying to build more apprenticeship models, internships models from a high school student where they can go to school 2 days a week and they can go be in an apprenticeship for 3 days a week. Switzerland, I'm fixed to take a trip over there with the governors, a few governors. I need you to come with me to that trip, right? So we're going to look at Switzerland, and their model is when you're a sophomore in high school, you literally decide if you're going to be an apprenticeship model and you're going to go to a trade route. And it's not poo-pooed on like it is here in the U.S. Like literally, I just met the president of Lufthansa. We've got a big 1,000-person employment company of Lufthansa. It's a German company. And he started as an apprenticeship. It is a very respected pathway. And then if you want to go become an engineer, you can go to 2 years of high school, junior, senior year basically, and then you go on to college. So American Airlines, they're a company in Tulsa, Oklahoma. They have their largest maintenance and repair facility there. I was meeting with their C-level executives. They said, Governor, we need more A&P mechanics. And I said, how much? They go, do you know, Governor, how much an A&P mechanic starting salary makes at American Airlines? I said, how much? They said $70,000 a year. And within 5 years, they're making $100,000, okay? So we set up an aviation academy in Norman, Oklahoma, where as a freshman in high school, if you want to be an A&P mechanic, you can literally start going to this high school, and by the time you graduate, you're an A&P mechanic. I went home and told my 16-year-old son, I said, you're going to become an A&P mechanic. and then we're creating pathways. You can go get your bachelor's, and then I asked that C-level group, I said, how many of y'all started as A&P mechanics? And about 40% of the room raised their hands that they started on the floor, then they went back and got their bachelor's and then master's, or became an engineer or worked their way up. If you have a technical degree and then you go on and get a higher ed, you're invaluable. A buddy of mine in Oklahoma, he went to West Point. His son just graduated with an MIS degree from Oklahoma State and started working in IT for a big company. Hates it. Going back to welding school. And so I told him, I said, you got to go become an A&P mechanic. I think I really wish. I go, with your background and you get the technical degree, it's unbelievable what you can accomplish. And then as an entrepreneur, there's all kinds of business opportunities. I've got buddies that have, overhaul shops for PT6 engines, et cetera. And so it's just they're great careers. The HVAC that you mentioned, all that stuff. And so we're really just trying to promote and just take away the stigma. You don't have to go to college. Matter of fact, the Silicon Valley folks, it's almost cool, the guys that drop out, right, and get into coding now. And so we're just trying to break that stigma to create more apprenticeships. I'm trying to get my businesses involved to come to the high schools and say, hey, we want you to start working a couple days a week, and we're trying to break up that model. We've got a manufacturing skills development school now that actually they're paying kids to go to this school. Because they're actually learning the trades, and then companies are buying from the CNC machines. So I just think there's just a lot of disruption happening right now.
Governor Dunleavy, you are a big enthusiast about the ability of technology to help students learn and to build skills. Could you talk about what you're doing and what you envision in that lane, and then also address some of the worries that people have about how AI is going to dumb down education or make it difficult for students to really focus and learn?
I think AI is going to be the ultimate disruptor, I think, in the history of this world, to be honest with you. I mean, it goes from data to intelligence. How many here, you don't have to raise your hand, how many here use a chat or some other type of AI? Not just once in a while, but now consistently. How many don't even go to Google because it's just kind of static data, right? So now we're entering into the intelligence revolution is what this is. And this is just the beginning of it. 5 years from now, 10 years from now, you won't even recognize the world, right? We could go back and talk about things that we don't use anymore, everything from Polaroids to VHS tape to floppy disks, et cetera. I just cleaned out my garage and I have all these things in a box. And my kids were looking at it like it was a museum. They were like, is this stuff real? We heard about this stuff and we just used it a few years ago. The rapid advance of technology is going to be so fast. What may have taken 5 years, 10 years is going to be taking, in some cases, months. And we need to train kids. We need to teach kids to be able to be critical thinkers and not just rote. Because right now, you can put together a paper or a plan or a process or design a house with an input that takes literally 15 seconds, spits it out in a minute, which would have taken human beings hours, if not days, to put together. And so, how do you compete with that? The only way you compete with that is you start to educate kids on how to ask the right questions, how to deal appropriately with AI in the conversations. If you use AI enough, you'll start to realize that it's starting to get inside your head. It's starting to understand who you are. That's the intelligence aspect that we're talking about, beyond data. So we have to train kids to understand what's happening when they're on AI, how they remain in control of themselves when they're on AI. But the idea that you're going to be teaching kids quote skills from 25 years ago. In many respects, you're going to fall behind. I think it's going to be an AI world. The Chinese are going to force that on all of us. We're either going to be followers or leaders in that. And I'll throw this out there. I believe within 5 years, 6 years at the most, we talked about this. You're going to have a teacher, a holographic avatar teacher, that a kid could turn on in their living room or at the kitchen table, and it's interactive. Good morning, Bob. How are you? Good morning, teacher. How are you? What are we going to work on today? Socratic method discussions. It is the future right now as we speak. So those that design that the right way in education, in business, in politics, you're going to win. Those that try and resist it, they used to call those Luddites, where you go and you destroy the machines at night in the textile mills in Britain so the guilds can still survive. It doesn't work. It doesn't work.
Governor, any idea about incorporating technology into the curriculum, the positive side of it, and then also maybe limiting some of the harms that you hear teachers talking about with cheating or things of that kind?
Yeah. Well, we got rid of like cell phones in the classroom this past year. So we said like cell to cell, no, or bell to bell, no cell. And what we found, I went and toured a bunch of schools, and the kids really appreciated it. They were like, "Thank you, Governor, but there's not as much pressure. We're not seeing this post and this during class having to check our stuff." The teachers love it. It's a more sterile learning environment in the classrooms without all the cell phones. So that was really good. One of my friends, a principal of a school, just said he was having problems with kids taking pictures in locker rooms, changing, and watching inappropriate things like in a lunch setting. And so, if you can imagine, I mean, what kids would do. I can't even imagine my 14-year-old, some of my buddies back in school, what with cell phones and all that. So I think that's some of the things we've done already, but also the good use of technology. I've been in these classrooms where they put the virtual goggles on and they're literally grabbing a beating heart out and looking at it in all these different ways in the science class and dissecting it and looking at these things, and the thing that you can bring to life with technology is unbelievable. I went to advanced manufacturing and it was very technical, putting a screw here and doing this and doing that. And literally with the goggles on, it was telling the worker exactly what to do at every single different stage. So very complicated processes, you got to get them in order. And so I was just amazed at the advanced technology that you can do and train. I mean, I could have got and assembled what they were doing with just following the step and with virtually following exactly what they told me to do. So there's some great, we don't want to shy away from it. We've got a lot of energy in Oklahoma, and so we're getting data centers and we want to train that next generation. We're not running from that technology. We want to teach coding at an earlier age, the STEM stuff. I think every kid is designed differently. God puts different desires and abilities in their heart, and we want kids to have all these experiences and find where they're best fulfilled in life, because everybody's American dream's different. What do they want to do, and how can we expose them to all these different possibilities?
Well, we've reached the end of our time, but I think the two of you have given everyone a lot to think about and chew on. Could you join me in thanking Governor Stitt and Governor